My name is Henry Quinlan, and I have been in the publishing business for more than 40 years. I've published all kinds of things, books, newsletters, DVDs, even a telephone book in Moscow, in Russian. So I've done about everything you can do in publishing. And what that is, there are two lessons I've learned. The two major lessons I've learned is one, that everyone has a story. And as I go around to senior centers, I'm more than convinced that that still applies. Very often after my presentation, someone will come up to me and say, Mr. Quinlan, I'd like to get some more information from my daughter, or my son, or something like that. And I'll say, well, what about you? And I remember one woman in Hingham. She was about 5'3", 5'4", thin woman. And I said, well, let's start with you. How many children do you have? And she said, I have 14. Whoa. And they're all alive. I said, well, if that isn't a story, I don't know what is. So people many times don't recognize. Another woman came up to me and she said, I've been a teacher for 40 years and now I'm writing a book about mothers who raised Down syndrome children. And I said, that's a fabulous idea. And even better is her title, Hidden Heroes in the Neighborhood. So there's stories everywhere you look. And what I have so here are some of the people whose stories I have published. And you can see various backgrounds here. And these, remember Wally Schirra? Wally was one of our first astronauts. Remember Casey Jones, former coach of the Celtics? I did a book with Babe Ruth's daughter about Babe Ruth. And then I did a book, Cops or Robbers. It was about the police in Medford, Mass. And about 25 years ago, on a Labor Day weekend, 5 of them went through the roof of a bank, down into the vault, and emptied all the safety deposit boxes. They only got caught on the last day the statute of limitations ran out, when 2 of the officers who were addicted to cocaine shot each other. And one of them, they both survived, but one of them turned state's evidence. And that was it. A little footnote to history, the prosecutor in that case was Bob Mueller, who today is looking after Mr. Trump. My most interesting publishing venture was to publish the Make Way for the Ducklings children's book in Russian as part of a summit between George Bush the First and Gorbachev.
I don't remember the Cops and Robbers.
You do remember?
I don't remember seeing it.
Yeah.
I know about it.
It was on 60 Minutes, and it was a HBO movie.
Wow.
Here is a book I published last week. This book was written by a man who was 88 years old by hand. 62,000 words. And that's when I say, you know, the energy that has created in him. Authors in their senior years who get involved just get almost possessed and are so motivated. This book was written by a man 82 years old. He rose from modest circumstances to be the head of Putnam Investments in Boston. That's why the piercing the Irish ceiling, the first Irishman to be the head of a financial firm in Boston, Putnam Investments. But he was so energized, he corralled me.
Okay. First and second Hancock Tower.
Right.
The first one, I watched them build it.
Okay. I did too. And so, so in any event, he corralled me to, and the two of us are now writing the history of a high school, BC High. I have published books, everyone is different. I've published books, one man wanted to write a book, 10 copies, just for his family, a very intimate book. This man had he wrote a book about a part of his life. He was so happy with it, he printed 5,000 copies and gave them away. And then he was further happy because he threw himself a publishing party at Mar-a-Lago down in Palm Beach. So everyone is different. This is another interesting publishing story. So 1988, he was a young diplomat in the Soviet Union in Washington, D.C. And I called him one day because I saw him speaking and he spoke perfect English. And I said, what about writing a book comparing the two societies, living in Washington and Moscow? So he said to me, well, I like the idea, see if I can get my permission from my bosses. And they did, and so I went down and we had a meeting and he went on and started writing it. And about 2 months later he called me one day and he said, I can't explain why, but I just been ordered back to Moscow. And he said, I'll be in touch. And of course I'm thinking that's the last I'm going to hear from him. Sure enough, about 4 months later he called me and he said, I can't explain much, but he said, I want you to come over here, call Oleg Benyuk down at the embassy and he'll get you a ticket. You come over and be a guest of the government. So over I went, and he was one of the planners of Perestroika. And he said, I'm going to pick up the book and so forth and so on. And then they had the coup and the change of governments and all the rest of it. And he ended up becoming an ambassador to Chile, to the NATO, and to Canada. And he spent the last 15 years the Russian ambassador to the UN. But the point of the story is, we had dinner last August in New York. When he sat down, he said, the first thing he said to me was, I wish I wrote the damn book. He got so busy, and he's been carrying that regret with him all his life. Now further was that he died a month later of a heart attack, sitting at his desk. So why do you write? Something can be as simple as writing your story, leaving your legacy. Reevaluate memories. Everyone that goes through this process learns to evaluate their memories. You think this happened in such and such a time, and then you start checking with a family, a friend, or the internet, and you find out maybe it did, maybe it didn't, and you refine it. Resolve conflicts. This happens on almost every instance, particularly with seniors. They're looking at a conflict with some other person that's 30 or 40, 50 years old. Suddenly it's not so important, and they tend to resolve them. Get a renewed sense of purpose. This is probably the prime feature of seniors writing. They get a totally new sense. The man who was 88, the book is out this week. He's now 90. He just took his first European trip in 30 years. He was so energized. You help fend off memory loss. This is, I think we all, as it gets senior years, this is a real issue. You provide lessons from your ears. I don't think I'm going to surprise anyone here when I say your ears, your children really don't know much about your life. Your grandchildren know even less. So writing your story is a good way to provide some lessons learned. And what they're interested in is not how you got into some problems in your life, it's the strategies you use to get out of those problems. So you have three choices if you decide to write about your life. You can do it in an autobiography, which is from birth to today. A memoir is a slice of your life. So if you were an Olympic athlete, you want to write about the Olympics in your life, that's a memoir. Or you were a banker or some kind of professional, you want to write just about a segment of your life. Some people can do it using writing a novel, But I don't recommend it because it takes a real skilled writer to create a fictitious person that is still like you and telling your life. It's really, really difficult, so I don't recommend it. So you have two choices. If you're going to write your autobiography or your memoir, you can write it chronologically, or you can write it by theme. Again, if you're going to, some people say, I just want to write one chapter will be about my professional life, one chapter about parenting, one chapter about my hobbies. So they slice up their life by chapters that way. Others, and an easier way to do it is just chronologically. I was born, I went to grammar school, high school, and so forth. When you create an outline, you just kind of lay out on how you see the book evolving. Then introduce yourself in your writing. Do not try to write like someone else. I have some people come up to me and say, well, I love John Grisham. I'm going to write just like John Grisham.
I do too.
And I say, well, you're not John Grisham. And people who know you, when they read the book, are going to say, John and Mary, they don't talk like this. So it's be yourself, and there's nothing wrong with being yourself when you're writing about your story. Be comfortable with whatever you write. Use Google to fact check as you go along. The other ingredient to this process is to have one person is the go-to person throughout the process. And there's one requirement for that person, and that is to be honest. You want to write something and then pass it to this person and say, does this make sense? And use that person as a go-to person. And at the end, have them read it before anyone else, that this book makes sense and it hangs together. I'm going to skip about the novel. Some people want to write co-authors, mother and daughter, father and son, business associates. There's only one rule that I believe, and if you're going to do it this way, is to do not write the same thing. In other words, divide up the story and each write a separate part of it. If you both say, we're going to write about my high school years, you'll have endless conflict because you have the perspective of a parent and the child, and they're not going to coincide and be agreeable on what those high school years are all about. So separate the responsibility. Tips for writing. Who you're writing for? The man who published the 10 books, he's writing on a very intimate level just for his family. People who want to write for friends and associates and maybe the public, it's a different style of writing. What is the purpose? The perfectly legitimate purpose is to write your story. Nothing wrong with that. How to treat family members and friends. If you're going to write something about a family member and there's a real issue, I would go to that person first and say, listen, I'm writing and this is what I'm going to write about. The conflict between you and I, or whatever it is, and make sure that they buy into what you're writing. I also say, if you can't say something nice about someone, don't say it, because that reflects on your credibility. Authors who have written and used their books to settle scores, very often when you read the reviews, it'll be not a good review because they're using a book for a purpose other than really to tell a story. Having said that, a woman came up to me afterwards, one of my presentations, and she said, I heard what you said about being nice. Don't say anything unless it's positive. And she said, I don't agree with you. I said, well, you certainly can. It's your story. She said, I wrote about my in-laws. The only thing I want to know about my in-laws is the date their obituary appears in the paper. So, power of anecdotes. You cannot use enough anecdotes to really give texture and meaning to what you're writing. So let me give an example. Several. Casey Jones described in his book, there was 20 seconds left in our game against the Los Angeles Lakers. We called a timeout. We had a huddle. We went back on the floor. The ball was passed around 3 times. Larry Bird got the winning basket, and that was the end of the game. So I said, well, what goes on? What's the connection between the huddle and how was there a play in there or what? He said, oh no, he said, it was always the same. He said, we'd get in the huddle and Larry Bird would say, give me the ball and get out of the way. So that gives you different texture. So Bob Riley's, the Putnam Investments. So he talks about when Mr. Putnam used to have a Christmas party for the executives. He wrote, we would have a Christmas party in the Mr. Putnam's office. It was very brief, once a year. That was it. So I said, well, describe the party. He said, well, all the executives would go into Mr. Putnam's office and they'd form a circle. Someone would come in and give us one drink. And then someone else would come in and give us an envelope. And in the envelope was our yearly bonus and our salary for next year. So he said one of the purposes of the envelope was that would ensure they would all leave very quickly. So that tells you that's much better than just say we had an annual Christmas party. You cannot use, I'm working with a man, so he writes, my wife and I had a divorce, but we both loved the town we were in, and we had enough land, so we decided I could build a house out back, and I would stay in the house, and she would stay in the main house. And he went on, and I said, well, because I read your manuscript, what'd you do with the dogs? Oh, he said, you forget, Henry, I'm an engineering professor. I built a tunnel between the houses so the dogs could have free run. So that's a little anecdote that gives you a lot more meaning to building 2 houses for a divorced couple. Devise a schedule. By the way, you don't have to take too many notes because at the end of this, I'll give you my email address and I'll send you this PowerPoint.
Oh, great.
So that'll save you from, and all the links that you'll see work. So devise a schedule. Some of us are morning people, some of us are afternoon people, some evening, but whatever is comfortable with you, that's when you probably should write. Focus on the writing. Just forget about what's the future of the book. Just focus about the writing. Use resources, family, friends, to check on things. Is this, again, as you get older, you want to check on your memory. No problem reaching out to everyone to see if you remember correctly. Photos and mementos, terrific to jog your memory. Again, use Google search or any other search engine to confirm. Here's the point where most people stop. They come up to a point in their life where there's a real crisis that was very painful. And they don't want to write about it. And many people just stop right there. Others will go around it and not mention it. And again, your credibility, because someone who knows you is going to read about it and say, what happened to this? An event that you knew about. So there are ways to deal with it. And the most popular way is go outside the manuscript and just sit down and write that event from the gut. Just keep writing. Give it no thought, just write it out. Put it aside and then go back in about 7 days, look at it, change it, put it aside, and another 7 days. Some people will do that 8, 9, or 10 times before they get it right, how they want to insert it in their book. It's a very good way of doing it. Some people want to do it orally, will tape record, but the same theory. set it aside for 7 days, and then come back and listen to it, and then change it and redo it. So when you finish the book, there's 2 features you want to give some thought to. The first line of the book and the title. So to finish the book, when I met with my Russian friend, he said to me, I'm going to write the book and rewrite the book. And I said, well, you know, at some point you got to finish the book. And he said, but Henry, Tolstoy wrote War and Peace 12 times. I said, well, you're not Tolstoy, so let it go. And particularly with seniors, that's always an issue. Give it to that family member or friend, whoever you're assigned, to read the book before you go any further. Does this make sense? Finishing touches. First line, call me Ishmael from Moby Dick. It takes you, brings the reader right in and wants to know more. Charles Dickens, the best of times, the worst of times. James Patterson, this is a link to a video where he's teaching a class on novel writing. He talks about his first famous first line, the first time I died. Great first line.
What book was that, Henry?
I don't know. It's in the title. Title is really important. What They Don't Teach You at Harvard Business School. That first came out as just kind of a bland treatise on business management. I forget the actual title, but it's only sold about 500 copies. They took back the book, same book, put a new title on it, What They Don't Teach You at Harvard Business School, and it sold 2 million copies. So you can see the difference, the importance of a title. The book, The Cops Are Robbers, that I did, that title was catchy enough that it caught the eye of 60 Minutes, and they did a segment on it, and then HBO caught their eye. And when I say caught their eye, they said, wow, I want to know more about this, and they made a movie out of it. So here are 3 really good titles. The first book, these are all by first-time authors. The first book, and these are e-books. The first book, No One Ever Had Sex on a Tuesday. Great title. Sold 750,000 copies. The next book, Vanishing of Ruth, that sold 500,000 copies. The last one, Taunting the Dead, that sold 500,000 copies. So you can see how the titles create some interest, and you say, I want to know more about this. Here's 3 more. You're Not Pretty Enough. Murder by Pencil. The Perks of Being a Wallflower. All really good titles that really draw you in. So in this PowerPoint that I'll send you, there's a links to design your cover. These are free clip arts if you want to design your own cover. Editing. This is something I always get asked about, how much editing. Some people want to spend a ton of money, and what happens is that they let the excellent get in the way of the good. So you don't have to spend a ton of money on editing, especially in this area where if you want an editor, all you have to do is put an ad in Craigslist and you'll be inundated. We have so many well-educated writers and editors in the greater Boston area. But some other things that you can use yourself. If you write your book in Word, and as you read it, go chapter by chapter, and sometimes you'll notice that you keep repeating the same word or phrase. And a way to check yourself is to put it in the search button of Google Word and put in whatever the phrase is. I did one for a man. I'm reading it and he kept saying, I mean. And I found out he went with that search, he put it in 47 times in one chapter. Mm-hmm. So that's excessive. Get a friend for a reader or get a professional reader. Here is a new app that is really, again, is terrific. Believe it or not, this costs $19. And you load your text onto it, and it'll tell you if your sentence doesn't make sense, if your sentence is very difficult to read or too simple, and it'll color code each one. And I'll show you what it looks like. So that's how it color codes. I mean, technology is just taking over everything. So by the time you go through this and put your manuscript through this, most of editing is done before, so you really don't have to spend a hell of a lot of money on getting a professional editor. So then you finish your book, you have the question, do I self-publish or do I look for a publisher? Here are 3 examples of people who will surprise you. They couldn't get a publisher for their first book. Lisa, Geneva, Still Alice. John Grisham, no one would touch his book. He borrowed $5,000, printed it, got good reviews, and a publisher picked it up, and the rest is history. James Redfield, he borrowed money, printed the book, and then started going around the country giving speeches, and 20 years later he sold 10 million copies. So, and no one would touch them in the beginning. So here's some of the odds against you if you want to look for a publisher. As we speak, there's about 2 million manuscripts floating around the publishing world between agents and publishers. If you wrote a book and said the title was, I Slept with Donald Trump, you would be published immediately. In this society where it's so driven by celebrity, it's that they're all looking for the celebrity author or topic. Another route to go is what John Grisham did. Publish yourself, get good reviews, and then a publisher will pick it up. If you do it right in the self-publishing, you should be able to recoup any money you spent in design or editing and maybe make some, and I'll show you how in a minute. If you're looking to do a book that's highly technical, needs a lot of drawings, Kickstarter, IndieGoGo, both crowdfunding sources that you can use. Kickstarter is the best one. They have a success rate of about 30%. And the average is between $5,000 and $7,000. Here are 3 self-published books, and James Ring is a retired FBI agent. He's become an author, and he spent most of his money on design of the covers. And here are the economics. So he self-published. So this book is 428 pages. He sells it for $15.95. To make one book cost him $6.08. So that's the spread on the self-publishing. That's an ISBN number. It's purely like a social security number for books. That's how libraries and bookstores order. CreateSpace has been around a while. Ingram Spark is a new one that'll actually, you can now self-publish hardcover books under the same theory. So you want to, this is how the magic begins. You have your book in Microsoft Word. Then you put it into Pages using Microsoft Word. Then you save it as a PDF. You log on to CreateSpace and it'll say, do you have a manuscript in PDF? And you say yes, and you load it up. And then it'll say, do you want a review copy? And you say yes, and 4 days later, the review copy is in your mailbox. And you can see the quality of the book is very good. And that's just a review copy. You can pass it around. So if you make your changes, then it'll ask you, do you want to get another review copy? And if you can, if you want, or you say no, there aren't many changes. Then it'll ask you, do you have a cover? If you've had a cover, you load it up. If not, they have software in here that'll help you design a cover. And then it'll say, do you want to publish your book? So you say yes, and you want one book. So it's $6, and the book automatically is posted on Amazon for sale. It's that simple. You can order 10 books or 20 books or 100 books, and then and this is what CreateSpace looks like. And it's a very simple, and it walks you through it step by step. There's nothing in here that is not plain English. And I always say to people, you know, many people say to me, well, I'm not too literate. And you have kids and grandkids that can do it in no time, but if you just take your time and walk you through it, and it has excellent instructions, it can be done. So here's all the help. Again, there's plenty of help on CreateSpace to get it done. So let's say you spent $1,000 on your book. The golden rule is to publish in the fall, because people will come to your publishing party and will buy 2 books, 5 books, 6 books as Christmas gifts. So Jim Ring, in his book, he spent about $1,000, and he had a publishing party, and he took in about $1,800. So always publish in the fall. Invite family, friends, associates, whoever. To get your book reviewed, always best to start locally, because a local newspaper will invariably give you a good review because you're local. Take that good review and then move to regional. Publishing and selling books is a step-by-step process where you go out. So if you go into a publishing house today, or any day, this has not changed. The question they're going to ask you is, who's going to buy your book? And so that always starts with, well, family, hopefully, then friends, then associates, and then if you have writing a book about cooking or golf, the cooking and golf world, and that's how they build the marketing. Goodreads is a website that you can get online reviews. Once your book is up on Amazon, get friends to write reviews and post them on Amazon. Make sure they don't do it on the day the book comes out, because there's a little credibility issue. They didn't read it in a couple of hours. And then if you want to get your book into bookstores, have your friends again call the bookstores. And they get so many calls, then they're going to order the book. Social media, those people that sold the 700 to 500,000 books were very active on social media in promoting their books. And it gets better and better and easier. These are some more social media sites that, and other ways of promoting your book. Another option is if you have, some people don't want to write about their story, but they have a box of pictures. So one way to do it is to scan those pictures and put them into a PowerPoint like this. And as the frame comes up, you have a voice recorded behind the picture describing what the picture is and what role it played in your life. And again, this is all free software. So this is the link to the software for the PowerPoint, which I'm using here, that you can put the voice behind it. This is the free software download onto your computer. You can take about a $10 microphone, and as the picture's there, you record 2, 3, 4 minutes about the picture, and then load it behind the picture, and then move on to the next one. So here's one I did for my grandkids. Having lived in Moscow during the Soviet days and the days of Russia itself, so what I did is took pictures and explained to them. For instance, this is the Kremlin. The big white building is the Kremlin palaces. The cathedrals are on the right, and way in the background are the government offices. This is one of the palace ballrooms in the Kremlin. This is the Moscow subway.
Do most Russians speak English now?
A lot of them do, a lot of them. This is the Tsar's summer palace. I saw that and I said, no wonder there was a revolution. This is one of my favorites. This was during the Soviet times. They had these water fountains all over. So you put a kopeck or a penny into the fountain. There's a glass down there. It fills it with water, take a drink, and put the glass back. Sanitation was not an issue. And this was the on the counter coup. So this is during a regular business day, and they had arrested Gorbachev, and they were sending the tanks into the city to claim the city. And I'm walking down the street here, this main street in Moscow, and I'm looking and I'm saying, you know, something isn't right. And then I noticed the tanks were stopping for the red light. And I said, it can't be that serious. And sure enough, when they got down to Red Square, they wouldn't fire on the people, and that was the end of it.
Were you free to use the camera?
Yeah, yeah.
No problem?
No. And here's a nice publishing story. There's a cousin, distant cousin, who, this is her third book, J. Courtney Sullivan. She went to Smith. She tells the story, she got out of Smith and she got a job at Vogue. So her first day at Vogue, she walks in and, in her own words, I spent 4 years at Smith in my pajamas, now I go into Vogue and it's high fashion. She said, this was not for me. So after 3 or 4 months, she left and got a job at New York Times as an assistant to Bob Hebert. In that time, she was writing a novel called Maine. She got her through connections with the Times, got an agent, and got published and hit the bestseller list. So a young girl, in her next book, she sold to Reese Witherspoon for a movie. Now this book just came out last month or so, and it hit the bestseller list, at least in Boston, that I know of. But a nice young lady, and this is, she's been marked as a writer who has a real future, so her publisher is promoting her with a lot of money. So here's my email address. You can write to me, and I'll send you this PowerPoint or answer any other questions you may have. And I'll take any questions now that you may have.
If you just wanted to do something for your own family,
Right.
like there were many things I didn't find out until I was in my 80s. from a cousin that explained a lot of the turmoil that went in my younger years.
Right, right.
So I thought I would try to write something that said, had I known,
Right.
or if I had known.
Guess what I found out?
Because then I was thinking, there were so many, I have a large family, I have 8 children. And I was a single mom with bringing up 6 of them. And there are so many things there. It's not a close family. I mean, I know they all love each other, but it's not like they talk to one another. They were all together for my 90th birthday a couple of years ago. And then they said, wow, and grandkids were there. I mean, it was pretty wonderful. Suzanne was there. And they keep saying, we should have another reunion, but nobody wants to do it. And I was the last one to do a reunion 20 years before that.
Yeah.
You know, so it's that type thing. So I thought, before they lose complete contact with each other, I want to write something about each of them that maybe nobody else in the family knew.
And good idea.
But now can I combine my own, had I known, with these individual stories? I'd like to put it all together.
Sure, sure. Why not?
Maybe like the first chapter is just me. And
Yeah, yeah, sure. Whatever you like, sure.
Yeah.
Because I actually, another woman that was at one of these is doing that, almost the same, with 5 kids. She grew out of 5 kids alone. And some of the same issues. So she's now writing to fill in some of those holes.
I have like 4, just so I didn't forget things that happened in my life. I'm
Notebooks.
Yeah, oh
Yeah,
yeah, I have
yeah.
about 4 of them.
That's good though, that's good. And all that shouldn't be lost to the future.
Well, that's how I felt, because I knew nothing about my mother's childhood, only from what my grandmother told me. My mother, you know, they just were different back in those years.
I did an oral history with my mother at 92. And in the beginning, it was like pulling teeth. But again, once she got involved in it, she became very active and let it all go. So, no, that's great.
Could you talk about costs of self-publishing?
Well, as I explained, if you use CreateSpace and you do all the work yourself, to produce one book, it costs you under $10. I mean, that's the beauty of it. That really is. Or if you want to print 1,000 books, so it's 1,000 times whatever it is, $6, 6,000, whatever. I mean, it's truly incredible how cheap it is to do.
Amazing.
And again, if you spend money on it, if you have a Christmas party or a book publishing party in the fall, for instance, Sunday we're having one for the man who wrote the book about the Kennedys, and there's 600 people coming. So he'll get back all of his money with that one day. There's people who buy 2 books, 5 books. Some bought, I already know, some people on Sunday are buying 20 books. Christmas gifts, perfect. 80% of all books are published in the fall for that very reason. And if you notice, a lot of the TV personalities, Bill O'Reilly being the prime one, every fall he has a book that's Christmas.
Does he actually write his own?
No, I doubt it.
I don't think so.
I'm not so sure anyone reads them either, but they're great Christmas gifts.
I read one.
Yeah. Any others? So feel free to contact me if you have any questions in the process. I'll send you this, and any help I can give, I'd be happy to.
Great.
This is a kind of a, I guess, formatting style question, just based on looking at the book that
Right.
you passed around. Can you say something about advantages, disadvantages of including pictures in the chapters that you're talking about that versus at the end?
Well, that book, the pictures were put at the end for economy because you're just doing a review book. In reality, when the book was actually printed, one segment of pictures was after chapter 2 and the other was after. But it becomes very expensive if you try to insert segments of pictures every time. So if you look at most books, they maybe have one section of pictures or maybe two, but to insert them all the way along the line becomes very expensive.
What about the cover?
Well, there are in CreateSpace you can create your own cover or get a designer to create a cover. A good cover is almost as important as a good title.
What would a professional designer charge?
Up to $1,000.
Mine doesn't charge anything.
Yeah, well, you got it right there. Yeah,
In-house.
yeah.
You know, CreateSpace provides the cover.
You can.
color
Yeah, yeah,
Always.
yeah.
Does it make sense to have color within the text?
No, no, you don't. Color in the text doesn't really, unless, you know, if you're doing kids' books, color. But for the normal book about a biography or memoir, you don't gain anything by inserting color into the text. In fact, it causes a lot more cost.
This is just an aside from the pictures you were showing. The Tsar's Palace, is that a museum?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
and then secondly, can people today just take pictures in the Soviet Union?
Yeah, well, it's now Russia.
Russia?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah,
Moving towards being the Soviet Union.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's very westernized. When I was there, was it was very different. But today, my sister was over there today, and we were trading emails this morning, and she's talking about all the high-end restaurants they have in Moscow. When I was there was a city of 10 million people. There were 5 restaurants. But it was part of their culture that every Saturday night families would gather in apartments and there'd be 10 people around a little table having dinner. There was a different culture. But now they're almost totally westernized. McDonald's and fancy restaurants, Uber and everything else.
My friend.
Yeah. He found you. So thank you for coming. It's my pleasure.
Very interesting.
And,
Yeah, you've given us a lot to think about.
well, if you have any questions going forward, feel free to ask.